Hi, I am back in the Homegrown Florida Garden after being gone for 2 long months. I went on an RV trip with my family and we abandoned the garden for 2 solid months. Before I left though, I did plant a bunch of stuff. If you didn't see that video, I'm going to put it at the end so you could check it out. But I planted a bunch of stuff and then I left. Nobody came by to check on it. There was no pest prevention, no weed management, no fertilizing. Really, the only thing that was automated was the watering system. And I'm going to show you exactly how I did that. So we're going to check out the entire garden from the raised beds, containers, the GreenStalks, the native Florida garden, and all of the fruit trees and berry bushes. So the first thing we're going to start out with is containers of tomatoes. I circled them around my rain barrel, and then I had my rain barrel slowly drip into a 5-gallon bucket, and I used these Blue-Mate watering sticks. They're basically spikes that have a hose, and that hose connected to that 5-gallon bucket, and it pushed water through this little, I think it's ceramic spike, down into the plant. Now, from what I could tell, it did work. I had one plant die, so I have 3 tomato plants. This one is doing its best. It's the slats. And then the other 2 do not look super great. And from what I can tell, it looks like they're not getting enough water. So it kept it alive for 2 months, which I think is still pretty spectacular. But it didn't thrive. Now let me show you which one did thrive, which is over here in the raised bed. Believe it or not, this whole giant tomato plant right here is just one plant. I had planted 5 in this particular area and all of them died. They were transplants. They weren't started from seed directly in the beds. I grew them up in my arrow garden and outside on trays. And I transplanted them here, and really the only one that worked was the one in the corner. And that, believe it or not, is the one that I used, that mycorrhizin, Highlands mycorrhizin. And I really didn't expect that to help in any way, and I'm not 100% sure that that's the reason this one survived. But it is kind of a coincidence that that one survived when all the rest of them died. And not only did it survive, guys, it thrived. You can see tomato clusters right there. There's more tomato clusters right here. A whole bunch of them right there. This whole plant went kind of crazy. Now clearly I have a lot of work to do because this needs to be managed. It has gotten really big. It did not grow up through the tomato cage that I hoped it would. But tomatoes don't listen when it comes to training them. So I'm going to have to do some work to get this trained up and off the ground. Otherwise, those tomatoes probably are not going to do that well. So when it comes to my tomato plants, I'm going to say that this was a win. Even though I abandoned it for 2 months, I still have tomato plants. I have a very healthy one here, and I have 3 that with a little bit of love, they're going to come right back. But let's talk about one pretty massive epic failure. Now that epic failure is this bed all the way down into that bed. So you probably are seeing quite a bit of green over here and you're thinking, oh, that doesn't look so bad. That is mostly weeds. So this bed right here was the carrot seed bed and it was direct seeded. Then this half of this bed was potatoes, and then furthest along were onions, all direct seeded. The carrots, not one single carrot came up. And I kind of suspected that this was going to happen because when I plant my carrots, I cover them. They're tiny, tiny seeds. They need to stay moist. And here in Florida, when I planted them, which was in September, it was still really, really hot. And so I covered them with cardboard, or you can use wood or plastic, anything to try to keep the moisture down. Well, because I was leaving, I couldn't leave that there, so I had to pull it up. So I did have suspicions that that was probably going to die, and it did. Now, the potatoes, on the other hand, they came about halfway, right? So the front ones, this front row right here really did grow well, but the 2 rows in the back, not one single one came up. That's kind of a bummer. I have this big open space where potatoes should be, and unfortunately they're not there. But I am very happy with the fact that the potato plants that came up in the front here, they look great. They look healthy. I don't see any blight or any kind of issues with them. I do need to hill them up. Now, technically, I'm of the belief that you don't need to hill potatoes, but I did plant mine kind of shallow. I usually like to plant them about a foot deep, but I didn't do that. I think I was just in a rush or something, and I didn't plant them as deep as I'd like. So I am probably going to be adding some soil, some mulch, something on top of them, just to make sure that those potatoes are not peeking out, especially since I have such a small amount now. And then the last section, oh guys, the last section, the onions. I had such high hopes for onions this year, and that is all weeds. That is not onions. Now I do see some onions coming in here, so it wasn't a complete failure, but if I kind of pull these aside, you're not seeing, you know, any onions really on this side. Well, maybe here's another little one. Clearly not as many as I was hoping for. I wanted to be able to grow enough for like a full year's worth of onions. That's not going to happen. So I did go ahead and reach out to Dixondale Farms. They still had some short day onion starts available. So I ordered those, and I should be getting them in the next couple of weeks. So I'm going to make up for it by doing starts. One surprise was I have a volunteer plant that came in, which always seems to happen in my garden, and this is a pineapple tomatillo plant. Right in the midst of the onions and the potatoes, I have this pineapple tomatillo. I planted a pineapple tomatillo once in my garden years ago, and ever since then it has volunteered back every single year, and it gives me fruit twice a year. I get a harvest in spring, and then I get a harvest in fall. I just let them pop up and grow wherever they're going to grow, and I'm constantly supplied with pineapple tomatillos. So unfortunately, we have to call this whole bed and a half an epic fail. But don't be disheartened, because we have some serious successes over in these 2 beds. Now, these 2 beds behind me are growing like crazy. They have done so well. In fact, this plant has grown completely outside of the garden beds it was supposed to climb. But once again, plants don't pay attention and they don't listen to what you tell them to do. So it did not climb, and I'm going to have to trellis it. But this is a Tromboncini squash. The Tromboncini squash did so well. There is fruit everywhere I look. Now, some of it looks like we have some animal activity in here, but there's plenty. I mean, tons to go around. If I just peek through here, you can see a bunch of little ones starting right there. And this plant, oh, here's another one. And this plant is going all the way down, all the way. This is literally just one squash plant. Now, the cool thing about Tromboncino squash is you can grow it as a summer squash, or you can grow it as a winter squash, or both. So my purpose was to grow it as a summer squash. I have been wanting desperately for so long to find a variety of summer squash that does well here in Florida. It is just so known that between the bugs and the heat and the humidity and the rain, we just have nonstop problems. But this one works. This one works. And while it doesn't look exactly like a summer squash, like a zucchini, I mean, it works, and it is abundant. Now I just got to get it to climb the trellis so it gets up and off the ground. Besides the squash, this is the other part of the bed. And this is where I have some cauliflower. This is that purple cauliflower that we grew. some Brussels sprouts, and every single one of my broccoli plants have survived and look like they are thriving. Weirdly enough, this is an amaranth. I believe it's a Love Lies Bleeding amaranth. I planted amaranth in my garden, I think 3 years ago, and it just keeps coming back. It will keep coming back as long as you let it flower. I'm going to take this one down because otherwise I'll have nothing but a garden full of amaranth. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but there are some serious weeds in this bed, along with all the other beds. Every single bed is inundated with weeds. It's going to be a bit of an exercise for me to get all of these weeds out of the garden. But that is okay. That is fine. I expected that. That happens every time I go on vacation. And you should expect that if you leave your garden for any length of time. You are going to come back because nature loves to cover itself. And if you're not going to cover it in a mulch or something else, it's going to cover itself with weeds. Another really good success is my sweet potatoes. Now, these were planted much earlier. So the sweet potatoes in this bed, and then there is a bed down here, which isn't doing quite as well, were planted in April and May. So they just kept growing right along, no problem. The downside is the bed in between them did not fare well at all, actually. It did not fare well. Pretty much everything I put in here died. And I put kohlrabi, cabbage, and beets. And other than this guy right here and this guy right here, I do not see any of the other plants that I planted. They have all died. And in fact, I do have some weeds, but I would even expect more weeds in this bed, but I didn't even get that much weeds in these beds. Unfortunately, this bed is a failure, so I am going to buy some transplants probably and start some seeds and get this bed replanted. In these last two beds, I planted a host of things, so many different things. It was kind of crazy, and most of them were direct seeded. And the big thing that I learned this time going on vacation than previous times is in the previous times I normally do a lot of transplants. And this time I was like, you know what, I'm going to direct seed a bunch of stuff and see how it does. The transplanted mustard and Chinese cabbage appears to have done wonderful. Everything else did terrible. Over here, I have a random, I don't know, some sort of brassica, I can't remember. The nasturtiums did come up, and I had some beans come up, although they are heavily damaged with bug activity. The pepper plants that were here do not look healthy, and the ones that I planted right here, which were direct seeded planted, did nothing. So that really tells me that if you are going to leave your garden for an extended period of time, you're probably going to be better off with plants that are a little bit older. Now, that was not really an option for me at the time because that would have meant that I had to start these plants in August. And I only have a certain amount of space inside my house to grow seedlings, and so I could only grow so many, and that was dedicated to these leafy greens, to the tomatoes, and a couple other things that did survive. But most of the stuff that I direct seeded did not do well, unfortunately. And so I think that they would have done well had it been spring and it was cooler weather and it held the moisture a little bit better. But since it was September and it was still very hot and it couldn't keep, the moisture on the surface for those direct seeded plants, they just didn't pop up. Now, they could still pop up. I have learned this, not the hard way, but I have learned that with some patience, if you put down a bunch of direct seeds and nothing ever happens, if you wait, those seeds will eventually wait for the right moment and then they will pop up. Not all of them, but there'll be some real strong ones in there that are like, hey, I'm going to pop up 6 months later because I feel like this is the appropriate time for me to grow, and they will pop up and they will show up. So I'm still holding out hope that I might see a few of these come through. So now that we're done with the raised beds, let's talk about the GreenStalks, because I think that one was an interesting little trial and error for me in terms of how to keep GreenStalks alive without watering them. So let me show you what happened to mine. So what I did with my green stalks is I disassembled them and I laid them out individually. And so the reason why I did that is because I thought that when it rained, it would have its best ability to keep it watered from the ledge of my shed. And they did. It actually did work. Although I will say this, I did plant beans, and I find beans to be one of the most forgiving plants when it comes to watering. And none of these look particularly extremely healthy, but they're still alive and they actually are still producing beans. So I'm gonna call it a win. So you can see some of the beans right here are just starting to come in. And then if we come down here, you can see more beans. I do wanna prepare you for something that happened to me. And that is right here. I had some sort of animal burrow into this spot and then chew away at the center of my green stalk. By separating them like I did, I think I left them vulnerable to, I believe that's either a rabbit or a rat. I don't really know a whole lot of other pests that are really keen on chewing plastic, but because I separated them, it gave them the ability to chew the center of one of the tiers. I'm not going to be able... I just see a giant bird. That's probably where all those seeds went. You can see him. I believe he's the culprit in some of my seeds going missing. He is very blatant. He's walking right up on us. I'm maybe 12 feet away from him, and he's just going around my yard looking for seeds. So I suspect that guy stole some seeds. I can't believe he's just like standing right there. He's not scared of me at all. I'm gonna let him go ahead because there are some weeds and there are some bugs, and I'm sure he's very excited about that. So I'm gonna let him do his thing, even though I suspect he is a thief. So the tier is not going to be able to be used again because I don't believe that that is going to pass the water correctly, unfortunately, because that animal chewed the center of it. So I am out one tier, which is okay, because if you have watched my previous GreenStalk videos, I only use 4 tiers because mine get wobbly. And also because I can't reach the top. I'm too short to reach the top and get water into it. So I only use 4 tiers. So I always have an extra tier kind of laying in my shed that isn't in use. And so I'll use that to replace this particular one. Now this guy behind me is probably gonna look like a failure, but it is not a failure. This is a huge success for me. I say it looks like a failure because it is pretty much a dead Seminole pumpkin vine. But I was so stoked to be able to get this Seminole pumpkin to grow up a tree instead of having to build another trellis. And from this one plant, I got 7 beautiful, pristine pumpkins. This is also a Machado variety. So once again, as we were talking about Trombicino over there with the summer squash, Seminole pumpkin, I think they're Machado. Don't hold me on that. For some reason now I'm second guessing that they might be Peepo. I think they're Machado. But the Machado variety is really, really, really good. And when I say variety, I'm sorry, it's a type. It's not necessarily a variety. So there's different types of squash, summer and winter. Peppo, Maximo, Machado, and there's another one that I can never remember. But they're just different kinds of pumpkins, right? And so you can get lots of different varieties under each one of them. But the Machado variety is kind of known for being like vining. It's known for being very resistant to squash vine borers. The ones that I have gotten seem like they're super resistant to powdering mildew, which is a huge plus in my garden. I don't know what actually killed this one. It should still be alive, but maybe it had reached the end of its lifespan, which is fine. It did produce 7 pumpkins on one plant. I think that's a huge success because most pumpkin plants are going to tell you that a vine is only going to produce 2 to 4 pumpkins. I got 7. I'm super stoked at that. And the fact that I could grow it up a palm tree and not have to designate more space in my raised bed to these giant plants was a huge win for me. The next part of the garden that I abandoned is my Florida native section, right? I have an entire Florida native up front and this one, but I figured I'd just show you the back one because the front one is behaving exactly like the back one. And that is, it is flourishing. These things really do thrive on neglect. If you want plants that will just take care of themselves, will produce beautiful, pretty flowers. I've got my first coreopsis flowers coming in. I have my first firebush flowers coming in up front. My blanket flowers are producing like crazy. This salt and pepper is just obscene. This guy was tiny before, and now look at him. Look at the spread on this plant. These are taking up a lot more space than I really expected. And at any given time, you can see little bees and butterflies and predatory insects all over it. The starry rosinweed flowers continued to flower even when I cut them back. The coreopsis flowering and getting huge. The milkweed back here clearly had some little caterpillars, some monarch caterpillars on it while I was gone, because these I expected to be full and they are not anymore. So by far the best plants that did in the garden were the Florida natives. I guess that shouldn't be a surprise. The last part of the garden that I wanted to show you was the fruit trees that have done amazing. In fact, it's pretty much like a jungle back here. Peachy, the peach tree looks great. The new plum tree is growing phenomenally. The lychee has put on all new growth again, multiple times. This is a sherbet berry tree that's kind of gotten a little bit crazy. The Barbados cherry, the sad Barbados cherry, is still a sad Barbados cherry. The potted fruit trees, like my banana here, did absolutely fine over here. I put them over here so that these big sprinklers would spray onto the pots and keep them watered. And that appears to work just perfectly. Now the one that got pretty intensely crazy on me is this elderberry. Oh my goodness, it got so big in 2 months. It's kind of crazy to me. And then I have my Java de Cabo. Once again, this is another fruit tree that I grow in a pot, mainly because these are tropical fruit trees. And even though I do live in Florida, I am on the northern side of the central side of Florida, and I do get frost here. I get pretty decent frost here, at least once a year, sometimes 2 to 3 times a year. And these guys will not handle that, so I keep them in a pot. And I moved that pot over here just so that the sprinklers could hit it, and that worked perfectly. The Blackberry is pretty insane. It's kind of taking up this entire space. Look at that. It's so huge and it's vining everywhere. I am going to have to trim it back. I should have trimmed it back in spring. I didn't do that. I did do a quick trim before I left, but as you can clearly see, it's growing all over the place. Now, the sad part about the fruit trees was that I think all of this new growth shaded out all the strawberries underneath. I do have some runners that I kept from those strawberries, and I have to decide whether I'm going to leave them here again or not, or whether I'm going to put them someplace else, because I believe that they got shaded out, the strawberries that were in the beds here underneath the fruit trees. I feel like they got too shaded out because I can't find any of them. They all died within that 2-month period, which is really surprising to me because they were doing so well all through summer. Better than any strawberry plant I've ever perennialized, they did. And then all of a sudden I leave and they die, which I wasn't doing anything for them before I left. So I really don't know why they died. Thankfully, I kept some runners, so I do have some runner plants. And so I just have to decide what I'm going to do with them. And then, of course, I want to mention that the pomegranate has definitely put on a lot of new growth. But the stars of the show here are the mulberries. The 2 mulberries. This one I cut completely down to nothing. And this is all the growth that took place over a 3-month period. I mean, the thing is huge. I'm really going to have to work at keeping these guys small. And I believe this one is the Everbearing, or I think it's World's Best, or I can't remember. And I believe this one is the Tide Dwarf. So I expect that this one is going to stay a little bit shorter. But man, has it gotten so bushy. So there you have it. It is possible to leave your garden and go on vacation. I think the big win for me was the watering system. And I didn't get to tell you about that earlier, so I'll tell you about that now. What I have is a sprinkler system, but I also have connected to my sprinkler system water hoses in the raised garden beds with micro sprayers on them. And so the micro sprayers spray water, a mist, over all of the beds. Very similar to like a drip irrigation in the way that it's set up, but different in the way that the water works. With drip irrigation, the water drips down. In the micro sprayers, it does a soft spray across the entire bed. And so if you do not have a watering system set up and you're thinking about one, I do have one that I created at my mom's house. Sorry, this guy's getting all up in my face. I set it up at my mom's house for under $100. So basically what you do is you get a hose, you connect it to a timer, and the timer gets connected to a faucet outside of your house. Then it comes with this tubing that attaches to the hose, and the micro sprayers are already attached to that hose, and you just place them. And that is the way that I water my mom's garden, because she doesn't have a sprinkler system that I can hook into. The timer sets it to go off every 2, 3, 4 days, whatever you want, for whatever time period you want. I usually do 2 times a week for 30 minutes at 4 a.m. That's my thing at my mom's house. During the summer, I tend to up it and increase it to 3 times a week. But during the winter, I may even get all the way down to 1 time a week. But I thought that the micro sprayer that I use at my mom's house is a great option if you don't want to do like a really heavy investment into the sprinkler system and connecting it to micro sprayers or drip irrigation. You can do something as simple as a timer, a hose, and these micro sprayers or drip irrigation. So I'm going to put all that down into the description so that you guys can check that out if that is something that you're interested in. Because for me, watering is probably the biggest task in the garden, and when you're going to go away for an extended period of time, watering is crucial. You cannot get away with growing a garden and not watering. So when I left for 2 months, watering was my primary concern. A plant can live and exist and just limp along without fertilizer. It clearly can grow through weeds, and the pest pressure chews up the leaves, but I still have a harvest. But watering is the one area that you cannot skimp on. They need water. And if you're not in the rainy season of Florida, you're going to have to supplement water. And so I think the micro sprayers are a really good option for that. I hope you guys enjoyed this video to see what it's like when you abandon your garden for 2 months and how things grow with absolutely no care. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I'm super excited to be back in the Homegrown Florida Garden, back in Florida. We had a great time on our trip, but it's always nice to be home. So happy gardening, guys.